You are not alone in a room right now. Or maybe you are. Maybe the room is quiet and the house is quiet, and the particular silence that surrounds you at this hour is the same silence that has been surrounding you for longer than you want to admit. But that is not what I mean. What I mean is this. You can be in a room full of people, at a family dinner, at a work event, at a gathering that was supposed to feel like connection, and feel the loneliness more acutely there than you feel it in an empty room. Because that kind of loneliness is not about the number of people around you. It is about the distance between who you actually are and who the people around you are seeing. It is about the conversation that stays on the surface when you are desperate for depth. It is about the smile you maintain and the version of yourself you perform, and the drive home afterward when the performance ends and the quiet arrives, and something in you that has been patient all evening finally speaks. And what it says is not dramatic. It just says, "I am still here." And nobody in that room knew it. If you have felt that, even once, even at 2 in the morning when you were honest enough to let it surface, then stay with me. Because the Stoics spent their entire lives inside that feeling, and they found something on the other side of it that most people never reach. Not because the loneliness went away, but because they changed their relationship to it so completely that it stopped being a wound and became something else entirely. Stay with me. If you are someone who has been carrying a loneliness that the people around you cannot see, and that the usual advice has never quite reached, subscribe to this channel. Every week we go deep into Stoic wisdom through real stories that address the experiences most people are too afraid to name out loud. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. Before we get into the principles, I need to say something about loneliness that most people in your life will never say to you directly. Loneliness is not a character flaw. It is not evidence that something is wrong with you. It is not the result of being too difficult or too sensitive or too much or not enough of whatever quality you have spent years trying to calibrate to make yourself more acceptable to the rooms you are in. Loneliness is what happens when the interior life you are actually living does not have enough contact with the interior lives of the people around you. That is it. That is the whole of it. And the Stoics, who were among the most interior people who ever lived, understood this distinction with a precision that most modern conversations about loneliness completely miss. They distinguished between two completely different experiences that most people collapse into the same word. Solitude, which is the condition of being alone with yourself, of having the interior space that the noise of other people fills, and that the Stoics considered not just tolerable but essential. And loneliness, which is the condition of being without genuine connection, of being in the world without being truly seen or known by it. These are not the same thing. And the Stoic response to loneliness is not to eliminate solitude, which most people's instinct drives them toward, filling every quiet moment with noise and company and the performance of connection. It is to transform the relationship with both, to find what lives inside the solitude that makes genuine connection possible, and to build the kind of interior life that is worthy of and capable of producing the depth of connection that loneliness is actually the hunger for. Let us begin. Answer me. The loneliness nobody talks about. Imagine a woman named Margaret. She is 61 years old, a recently retired librarian from a small city in Vermont who spent 34 years in a profession that was, at its core, an act of sustained connection with the interior lives of other people through the medium of books. She loved it. She loved the particular quality of attention that her work required, the ability to listen to what someone was actually looking for underneath the question they were asking, and to find the book that would meet them there. She was exceptional at this. And she is, 14 months into retirement, profoundly lonely. Not because she lacks people. She has a husband of 38 years, 3 adult children, 6 grandchildren, a book club she has attended for 20 years, and a community that knows her name and is genuinely glad when she appears. She is lonely because none of those people, not her husband, not her children, not the book club friends she has known for 2 decades, know the version of her that exists in the quiet of her own mind, the version that reads philosophy at 5 in the morning because it is the only hour when the house is still enough for real thinking, the version that has been carrying a grief she cannot name, not for a person or a loss, but for a version of her life that she somehow missed while she was living it. The version that looks at her grandchildren and feels a love so large and so tinged with the awareness of time that it sometimes frightens her. That version, the real one, the interior one, has never been fully introduced to anyone. And the loneliness she feels is not the loneliness of an empty room. It is the loneliness of an interior life that has never had a genuine witness. Now let us travel to ancient Rome, to a man who understood this specific loneliness from the inside, not as a philosopher studying it from a comfortable distance, but as a person who lived it at the highest levels of public life. Marcus Aurelius was surrounded by people every day of his adult life. Advisors, senators, generals, petitioners, the endless human traffic of an empire that required his attention and his presence and his decisions from the moment he woke until the moment he could finally, alone, open his journal. And in that journal, the only place where the interior Marcus had a genuine witness, he wrote with an honesty and a vulnerability that the public Marcus could never have afforded. He wrote about doubt, about grief, about the fear that he was not adequate to what was being asked of him, about the longing for something, he did not always have words for what, that the empire, for all its scale and significance, could not provide. He wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." He was not writing this as a comfort, he was writing it as a discovery. The retreat he had been looking for, in the company of philosophers, in the council of advisors, in the occasional friendship that rose above the transactional, was available to him all along. Not in another person, in himself, not as a replacement for human connection, but as the foundation that made genuine human connection possible. Because the person who has never sat with themselves honestly, who has never been a genuine witness to their own interior life, cannot offer genuine witness to anyone else's. And genuine witness is what loneliness is actually hungry for. Margaret eventually began doing something she had been doing for other people for 34 years. She started writing. Not a journal in the therapeutic sense. Something closer to what Marcus was doing. Honest, private, unpolished conversations with herself about what she actually thought and felt and feared and wanted. She was, for the first time in her life, a genuine witness to her own interior. And something shifted. Not in her external circumstances, not in the relationships that had not been reaching the depth she needed. In her. She became, gradually, without announcement, more able to bring the real Margaret into rooms where she had previously only brought the performing one, not with a speech, not with a declaration, with a quality of presence that was different from what she had been offering before. More there, more genuinely, specifically there. And the people around her, her husband, her children, the book club friends, began responding to something in her that they had not previously had access to, because it had not previously been available. Here is the first principle. The loneliness that most people carry is not the hunger for more people. It is the hunger for genuine witness, to be truly seen and known by at least one other person. And the path to that is not outward. It is inward first. Become a genuine witness to your own interior life. Know what you actually think, what you actually feel, what you actually fear and want and grieve. And then, gradually, selectively, with the courage that genuine self-disclosure requires, bring that person into the rooms you inhabit. The connection you are hungry for is available, but it requires you to show up as the person who needs it, not the performing version, the real one. 2. What Seneca knew about chosen solitude. Now meet a man named Gerald. He is 67 years old, a retired corporate attorney from a large firm in Houston who spent 40 years in a profession that rewarded the ability to be perpetually available, perpetually responsive, perpetually connected to the demands of clients who needed him at hours, that did not respect the distinction between professional and personal time. He was always reachable, and now he is retired. And the perpetual availability has ended, and the silence that has arrived where 40 years of professional noise used to be, is something Gerald does not know how to be inside. He fills it. Every available hour, golf, lunch with former colleagues, the grandchildren on weekends. A volunteer position he took not because it called to him, but because it gave his Tuesday mornings a shape. He is running from the quiet. Not because the quiet is painful, though sometimes it is, but because 40 years of professional life have trained him to experience silence as a problem to be solved, as the absence of productivity, as wasted time. He has never learned to be alone with himself, and the loneliness he feels, underneath the golf and the lunches and the structured Tuesdays, is the loneliness of a person who has spent 40 years in the company of others and has never quite managed to be in his own. Now let us travel to the outskirts of Rome, to the final years of a man who had been forced out of the noise of public life and discovered, in the quiet that replaced it, something he had been looking for without knowing it. Seneca had served in Nero's court for years, surrounded by the noise and danger and political complexity of an emperor who was brilliant and volatile and ultimately lethal. When he was finally forced to withdraw from that world, he did not fill the silence with substitutes. He inhabited it. He wrote to his friend Lucilius, "Recede into ipse quantum potes," withdraw into yourself as much as you can, and then he added something that reframes the entire question of solitude. Cum his versare qui te meliorem acturi sunt. Associate with those who will make you a better person. He did not mean only living people. He meant the philosophers he read, the writers he engaged with, the ideas he wrestled with in the quiet of his own mind. He had discovered, in the forced solitude of his withdrawal from Nero's court, that the interior life, properly inhabited, was not lonely. It was populated with the voices of every person whose ideas had ever genuinely engaged him, with the questions that real thinking produces, with the particular companionship of a mind that is genuinely alive to itself. Seneca was not alone in his solitude. He was, for the first time in years, in genuinely good company, and he wrote, "Dum differtur vita transcurrit." While we delay, life passes. Gerald was delaying his own interior life, filling every available hour with the noise that prevented him from having to sit with the quiet, and with the question that the quiet was waiting to ask him. Who are you when you are not defined by what you do? Gerald eventually stopped filling. Not all at once, not with any dramatic gesture. He started taking one morning a week, just one, and leaving it entirely unscheduled. No golf, no lunch, no structured Tuesday, just the morning. And himself. The first 3 mornings were uncomfortable in a way he had not anticipated. The quiet was loud in the specific way that quiet is loud when you have been avoiding it. Every restless impulse to reach for the phone, to make a plan, to give the morning a shape, he felt all of it, and he sat inside it anyway. And somewhere in the 4th or 5th unscheduled morning, he could not say exactly when, something shifted. The quiet stopped being the absence of something. It became a presence, his own presence. Finally, unhurriedly, with nowhere else to be. His own. And in that presence he began to find something he had not expected. He was interesting, not in a self-congratulatory sense, but in the specific sense that a person who has never had enough quiet to think their own thoughts all the way to the end discovers when the quiet finally arrives. He had opinions about things he had never examined, values he had never articulated, a sense of what mattered, specifically, personally, not professionally, that 40 years of professional noise had been drowning out. The loneliness did not disappear, but its texture changed, because Gerald was no longer running from the quiet. He was living in it, and a person who can live in their own quiet is no longer dependent on noise to feel present. That is not the end of loneliness, but it is the beginning of something the Stoics considered more valuable. It is the beginning of genuine company. Here is the second principle. Chosen solitude is not the enemy of connection. It is the condition that makes genuine connection possible. Learn to be in your own quiet without filling it. Not because the quiet is always comfortable. It is not, especially at first, especially after years of noise, but because the person you find inside it, the one who has been waiting patiently for decades for enough stillness to become visible, that person is the most valuable companion available to you, and the most capable of genuine connection with anyone else. Trusha, the quality of your company. Imagine a woman named Dorothy. She is 54 years old, a high school English teacher in a suburb of Atlanta, who has spent 27 years in the particular company of language and literature and the ideas that serious reading produces. She is not lonely in the way that word is usually understood, but she is isolated in a way that is quieter and more specific. The people in her daily life, her colleagues, her neighbors, her family, are good people, kind people, people she genuinely cares about. But the conversations that feed her, the ones about ideas, about meaning, about the questions that books open rather than close, are almost entirely absent from her life outside the classroom. She has tried. She has introduced topics that matter to her into conversations that were not built to hold them. She has recommended books that were met with polite disinterest. She has sat at dinner tables and felt, not with hostility, just with a kind of quiet resignation, the distance between what she was thinking and what was available to be said. She has accepted that this is simply what adult social life looks like. She is wrong. Epictetus wrote something that Dorothy needed to hear, and that most people in her position have never been told directly. Tell yourself first of all what kind of person you want to be, and then act accordingly in everything you do. But he also wrote something more specific about the company we keep and what it does to us. It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows. Dorothy had stopped learning from the people around her, not because they were incapable of teaching her, but because the conversations available to her had never been pushed into the territory where genuine learning happens. And Seneca, who had built his richest intellectual life in the letters he exchanged with Lucilius, across a distance that meant they rarely met in person, wrote about the quality of company with a directness that most people find confronting. Recede inde ipse quantum potes, cum his versare quite meliorem acturi sunt. Associate with those who will make you a better person. Not those who are available, not those who are convenient, not those who have been in your life long enough that the relationship is maintained by inertia rather than by what it actually produces. Those who will make you better. Dorothy eventually stopped waiting for the right conversations to find her. She started finding them. She joined an online philosophy reading group, not a casual one, a serious one, with people she had never met in person who cared about the same questions she cared about with an intensity that matched hers. She started corresponding with a former professor she had stayed in loose contact with for 15 years, not with the catching up emails of people maintaining a connection out of obligation, but with the real letters of two people who had things to say to each other. She started reading differently, not just for pleasure, though it was still pleasure, but as a kind of conversation with the author, responding in the margins, arguing with the text, bringing the engagement that serious reading deserves and that transforms the experience from consumption into genuine dialogue. She was no longer isolated. She was, in the specific way that Seneca had described, in genuinely good company. Not all of it in the same room, not all of it even in the same century, but real, nourishing, producing in Dorothy a quality of aliveness that the convenient conversations of her daily life had not been providing. And here is what happened to those daily life conversations as a result. They got better, not because the people changed, because Dorothy changed. She brought more of herself into them. More of the interior Dorothy, the one that the reading group and the letters and the marginal arguments had been feeding, was now available in the rooms she was already in, and people responded to it. Because genuine aliveness, the quality of a person who is actually engaged with ideas and questions, and the fullness of their own interior life, is contagious in a way that no performance of engagement can replicate. Here is the third principle. Choose your company deliberately. Not only the people who are in the same room, the books, the letters, the conversations that exist across time and geography, and the boundaries of what is merely convenient. Seek out the company that makes you more alive, more engaged, more curious, more genuinely yourself, and bring that aliveness back into every room you are already in. The loneliness that comes from intellectual isolation is not solved by more people. It is solved by better company. Go find it. It is available to you right now. 4. Love without losing yourself. Now meet a man named Raymond. He is 58 years old, a social worker in a mid-sized city in Ohio who has spent 30 years professionally in proximity to human suffering, and who has, in those 30 years, developed a capacity for empathy that is both his greatest professional strength and the thing that most consistently costs him his peace. Raymond does not just feel for the people he works with, he feels with them. He carries their stories home. He wakes at 3 in the morning thinking about a family he visited 2 weeks ago. He has a professional obligation to maintain appropriate boundaries and a personal constitution that makes those boundaries feel, in the darkest moments, like a form of abandonment. He is not lonely in the conventional sense. He is lonely in the specific way that people who give everything to others and keep nothing for themselves are lonely. He has poured himself out so completely in the service of other people's pain that there is very little Raymond left at the end of the day. And the people in his personal life, his wife, his friends, the relationships that should be sustaining him, are receiving the remainder of a person who has already given most of himself away. Marcus Aurelius, who governed an empire and felt the weight of 70 million people's lives as a genuine personal responsibility, wrote about this specific trap with the self-awareness of a man who was inside it. It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live. And Epictetus, whose philosophy was built on the precise distinction between what we owe to others and what we owe to ourselves, wrote, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." What would Raymond be if he were not only the vessel for other people's pain? Who was Raymond, specifically and privately and unapologetically, when he was not being a social worker or a husband, or the most emotionally available person in every room he entered? He did not know. He had not known for years. Because the emptying, the constant, generous, genuinely motivated emptying of himself into the needs of others, had been happening for so long that he had forgotten there was something in the container that was specifically and irreducibly his. Seneca wrote, "Vindica te tibi." Reclaim yourself for yourself, not from your work, not from your wife, not from the genuine obligations that genuine love and genuine vocation produce. For yourself. Raymond began, slowly, with considerable guilt that he recognized and did not act on, to reclaim specific hours, hours that were not in service to anyone else's need, hours that were spent on the specific, private, nobody-is-watching things that made Raymond feel like Raymond rather than like a function being performed. He started running again, not for fitness, he did not care about fitness, but for the specific quality of being inside his own body, moving through space with no agenda, except the movement. He started cooking elaborate meals, not for anyone else, though people were sometimes invited, for the specific pleasure of a process that required his full attention and produced something tangible and temporary and entirely his. He started reading novels, not the professional literature, not the books that would make him a better social worker, the ones that were simply, privately, nobody else's business, his. The loneliness did not disappear, but its cause changed. Raymond was no longer lonely because he had nothing left of himself. He was occasionally lonely, as all human beings are occasionally lonely, because genuine connection is rare and requires the specific kind of courage that most people deploy inconsistently. But he had something now that he had not had before. He had himself to be lonely with, and a person who has themselves, specifically, privately, genuinely, is never quite as alone as a person who has given everything away. Here is the fourth principle. You cannot genuinely connect with other people from an empty vessel. Reclaim yourself first, not from the people you love or the work you are called to, from the compulsion to pour yourself out completely in service to everyone else's need, while leaving nothing for the specific, private, irreplaceable person that you are. Fill the vessel, tend the interior, give from what overflows. That is how you love other people without losing yourself, and that is how you become capable of the genuine connection that loneliness is the hunger for. 5. The company of yourself. Finally, there is a woman named Eleanor. She is 71 years old, and she is what this entire video has been building toward. She has been widowed for 6 years. Her children are grown and living in different cities. She lives alone in the house she and her husband built their life in, and that she has, in the years since his death, rebuilt as entirely and specifically her own. She is alone. She is not lonely. And the distinction, which she could not have articulated 6 years ago in the first raw months of grief, is something she now understands with the clarity of a person who has lived on both sides of it. Loneliness, Eleanor will tell you, is the condition of being without connection to the interior lives of other people or to your own. Solitude, chosen, inhabited, genuinely lived, is the condition of being entirely in the company of yourself, and finding that company not merely tolerable but genuinely good. She has not arrived at this easily or without loss. The grief was real and specific, and the loneliness that followed it was the loneliness of a woman who had spent 44 years in genuine companionship and suddenly had none. But she has arrived. And how she arrived is the practical instruction that everything in this video has been pointing toward. She started in the first year of widowhood doing what Marcus Aurelius had done in the privacy of his journal. She began talking to herself honestly, not in the therapeutic journaling sense, in the sense of a person who is genuinely trying to find out what they think, about the grief, about the life that remained, about who she was without the person who had known her longest and best. She found, in those honest conversations with herself, that she was more interesting than she had expected, that the opinions she had been deferring to her husband for decades about what to watch, what to read, where to travel, how to spend a Sunday afternoon, were opinions she actually had. Specific, sometimes surprising, entirely her own. She started traveling alone, not to fill the loneliness with distraction, though travel was sometimes that too, and she did not judge herself for it, but to discover what Eleanor found interesting, when Eleanor was the only one deciding. She found she liked things she had not known she liked, that she moved through the world at a different pace when no one else's preferences were shaping the pace, that she had a relationship with solitude that was, in its own way, as nourishing as the relationship with her husband had been. Not the same, not a replacement, its own thing, specifically hers. Epictetus wrote in the formulation that Eleanor found and returned to across the 6 years of building this new life: make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens. What was in Eleanor's power was the quality of her own company, the richness of her own interior life, the honesty of her own self-examination, the courage to bring the real Eleanor into the rooms she inhabited, including the room that was just herself, alone, on a Tuesday evening with a book she had chosen, and a cup of tea she had made, and a life that was, quietly and without drama, entirely and finally her own. And Marcus Aurelius wrote in the line that Eleanor has on the wall above her reading chair, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." Eleanor found it, not because the loneliness was gone. It visits still on specific evenings and in specific moments that she does not try to argue herself out of or fill with noise, but because the soul Marcus was describing, her own specific, irreplaceable soul, has become, across 6 years of deliberate inhabitation, genuinely good company. She is not waiting for connection to arrive from outside. She is living it from the inside. And occasionally, in the book club she attends, in the letters she exchanges with a friend in Edinburgh, in the Tuesday afternoon phone calls with her daughter that have become, across 6 years, some of the most honest conversations either of them has ever had, the inside meets the outside, and something real happens. Not loneliness, not performance, not the careful maintenance of a connection that is surviving on obligation. Genuine contact between two real interiors. Briefly, specifically, irreplaceably touching. That is what the Stoics were pointing toward. Not the elimination of loneliness. The transformation of your relationship to yourself, such that the loneliness, when it visits, is visiting a person who is already in good company, their own. Here is the 5th principle. The cure for loneliness is not more people. It is a richer relationship with yourself. Become the kind of company you would want to keep. Honest with yourself, curious about yourself, genuinely present to your own interior life in the way you have been hoping someone else would be. And then bring that person, the real, inhabited, genuinely alive version of you, into every connection available to you. The depth you are hungry for exists, but it begins inside you, and it becomes available to others only when you have first made it available to yourself. We started today with a feeling most people are too ashamed to name out loud, the loneliness of a full room, the distance between who you actually are and who the people around you are seeing, the interior voice that has been patient all evening and speaks only when you are finally alone. And we walked through 5 principles that the Stoics built their lives around, not as a cure for loneliness in the sense of eliminating it, but as a transformation of your relationship to it, so complete that it stops being a wound and becomes a teacher. Become a genuine witness to your own interior life. The connection you are hungry for requires you to show up as the person who needs it, not the performing version, the real one. Choose solitude before it chooses you. Learn to be in your own quiet without filling it. The person you find inside it is the most valuable companion available to you. Seek company that makes you better, not the convenient kind, the real kind. Across rooms and books and letters, and the long reach of genuine intellectual engagement, and bring that aliveness back into every room you are already in. Reclaim yourself before you pour yourself out. You cannot connect genuinely from an empty vessel. Fill it first. Give from what overflows, and become the kind of company you would want to keep. The depth you are looking for in other people is available to you right now, in your own interior. In the honest, curious, genuinely inhabited life of a person who has stopped waiting for someone else to make them feel less alone. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Alone, by lamplight, in a journal no one was supposed to read. Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." He was not alone when he wrote that. He was in the best company available to him, his own. That company is available to you, starting tonight, in the quiet that arrives when the performance ends and the room empties and the voice that has been patient all evening finally speaks. Listen to it. It has been trying to introduce itself for years. Take care of your mind. The world will take care of itself. Until next time. If this video gave you a different way of understanding the loneliness you have been carrying, not as a flaw to be fixed, but as a hunger pointing towards something real, subscribe to this channel. Next week, we go deeper into the Stoic principles that help you build the richest possible relationship with your own interior life. Subscribe now, so you never miss what comes next. And if someone in your life is carrying a loneliness they have never been able to name out loud, share this video with them. Sometimes the most important thing you can give someone is the knowledge that what they are feeling has a name and a way through.